Welcome to Route 139. It's a program about self-awareness, about challenges facing each of us, youth in particular, and about seeking solutions and problem solving. Today we have with us a specialist, a psychiatrist, Dr. Manal Durgan, who works with children and adolescents and the many challenges that they face. Welcome, Manal. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Dr. Claudius. It's great to be here. Well, I would like to talk to you all about adolescence, a time of transition. Adolescence is a time of transition from childhood to adulthood. The ages are 11 to 20 years old. Teens act in ways during this time that seem mysterious or strange to adults and vice versa. Turmoil is expected. Personality most fully develops during adolescence. Adolescent development occurs in stages. Early adolescence between the ages of 11 to 13, middle adolescence between the ages of 14 to 16, and late adolescence between the ages of 17 to 20. Specific physical, cognitive, and emotional changes accompany each of these phases, and they're occurring simultaneously, but not necessarily all at the same rate. So some of these changes may occur faster or slower than others. We're going to start out with early adolescence.
Can I ask you a question, Manal? And of course, that in our Coptic community, we have different cultures and different backgrounds, and we have subcultures within our cultures. Are there differences in these three phases pertaining to cultures, or, you know, an adolescent is an adolescent? Will all adolescents transition into their adolescence at the same pace? Are we going to look to see the same signs, or are we going to look for something different based on their culture?
Basically, Marilyn, adolescence it proceeds similarly across all cultures. The difference, though, between cultures is how we react to these changes. And the caregivers and the families of our youth, parents, if you're watching this, you'll understand that the reactions we have in the Coptic community or in the Middle Eastern community to these changes in adolescence may be very different, and they may not see, there may be certain anxieties for every stage of adolescence that are present in our community that may not be present in the Western or American community, and Canadian and other Western communities, and vice versa.
Wonderful. So are we going to start with the first group? Because that's the first part of the adolescence. You know, it's great that they can do it gracefully, but it is an awkward time. It's an awkward time for them. They don't really know, or, you know, they want to be adults, but they're really not. And they want to, you know, cling on to that childhood, or maybe we want them to cling on to that childhood a little bit. They start to recognize boys, and boys start to recognize girls. And that, of course, adds a lot of stress to the parents, especially for the parents that in a culture that, you know, we don't have dating as part of our, you know, adolescent experiences within our Christian culture, within our Middle Eastern culture, and so forth. So how can we, you know, integrate the best of both cultures during this very awkward time?
Well, that's a great question. And I, as someone who is raised primarily in the Western culture, but born in the Middle Eastern culture, and yet also raised in the Coptic community in a Western culture, I really identify with that question. As a professional, I would advise to recognize that it's normal for children to want to be with their peers in early adolescence, and they value the opinions of their peers more at that time. And then in middle adolescence, they start to want to separate a little bit more from their peers and also from their parents and caregivers. And then in late adolescence, that process becomes a little bit more consolidated, a little bit more solidified. And I think that what will help bridge the gap between how being raised as in the Coptic community and in the Western community at the same time is remembering that our culture in the Coptic community values children going out in groups with each other and amongst friends And that actually is something that sometimes clashes with the Western culture, and sometimes the kids feel pressure to go out on dates with the opposite sex in pairs. And I would advise parents to remind the children that there's nothing wrong with having normal thoughts and feelings that are romantic about another person, but it's important to not be alone with that other person, and to try to see that other person, if you want to see them more, within a group.
And also not to ruminate too much on these thoughts, because if you ruminate too much on thoughts, you know, eventually you're going to want to put thoughts into actions, and there's some you know, slippery slope there. And we know about the physical changes, you know, the biological changes. The body's going to change, and there are certain aspects to change with it. Hygiene is an important factor, and so forth. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit. The other factors that are also important are the cognitive. Now, the cognitive is really, really interesting, and it plays a major part on who they think that they are. You know, that who am I now? And that is that whole identity thing. And I'll go back to the cultural part, because again, that is, you know, I want to identify with my culture. I don't want to identify with my culture. I want to be part of my family. I really want to distance myself from my family. So how can we understand the cognitive aspect, and maybe touch a little bit on the physical part as well too, and then hopefully the emotional too?
Sure. Well, in terms of their thoughts, adolescents, they go through various changes throughout their early teenage to middle teenage to late teenage years in their thinking, as well as in their physical development and their emotional development. Their thoughts tend to go from a very concrete sort of stage to slowly to a more deductive reasoning sort of stage, and then to a more capable of more abstract thought as they hit middle adolescence. And then in late adolescence, they start to be able to develop the insight and judgment not to act as impulsively on their thoughts and feelings. In terms of their physical development, you will often see a huge growth spurt in early adolescence, between 11 to 13 years old, in both boys and girls' height, and in the growth of hair on their body in various areas. However, they also, the brains of adolescents are very different depending on the stage of adolescence. In early adolescence, the brain is not fully grown and is still maturing. In middle adolescence, the brain volume starts to slow down its rate of growth, but there are many different dendritic and synaptic connections that are still occurring. And then in late adolescence, there's a phenomenon called pruning, where the extra brain cells that are not needed, the brain gets rid of them and sloughs them off. And then emotionally, there are also some characteristic changes that occur in each of the three stages of adolescence. Emotionally, in early adolescence, the child or the early teenager prefers the same-sex peer groups, and the influence, as we said before, of their peers is greater than their parents. They begin to test their parental values, and they begin the process of separating from their parents. They prefer peers to family. In middle adolescence, the emotional changes are characterized by adolescent turmoil, because this is the stage where hormonal changes, they are felt by the adolescent most keenly. And the adolescent wants contact with peer groups of both sexes, but the influence of the peers begins to decrease, and the adolescents begin to focus more on his or herself. And this is what we call the self-centered phase of adolescence. And then finally, in late adolescence, the emotional development is characterized by forming an identity where they're aware of their own uniqueness, which will become distinct from their family and from their peer group. And this is also usually achieved with a sense of belonging within a community. And that's why when our youth are involved as teenagers with the Coptic community, church, school, social communities that are positive and have good values, it encourages them to develop a strong, positive identity and good self-esteem. And this stage is also late adolescence, characterized by beginning to be trying to be independent from their parents and trying to start to choose a career path, although it doesn't usually end at that stage.
Thank you so much, Manal. You really gave us a lot of things to think about. And to our viewers, I think Dr. Manal Durgan really touched on a lot of very important points. And one of the things that you can take away from this is the importance of the pre-adolescent part, so that this way, as the child, as the young adult is starting to transition from childhood to adolescence, they can do it in a more graceful way. Now that we have an idea of what to anticipate, we can start the process, get them involved early in their church activities, in their community, help them so that they can form that positive identity that Dr. Durgan was telling us about, and as well to become critical thinkers and so forth. And so that this way that they can become the wonderful adults that we all want them to be and contribute wonderful things to our community, our American community, and certainly our Coptic community as well too. We ask you to join us again for another episode of Route 139. Come and join the conversation. God bless.